Hi friends, welcome back to the Animal Nerd Podcast. I'm your host, a swarm of bees in the shape of a human, and I'm so very glad that you're here. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you what is possibly the ultimate rags to riches story, certainly one that will make you go, damn, I wish I was him. Because today, we're talking about Tommaso the cat. We're often told that black cats are bad luck, omens of misfortune. And while it may seem like a harmless superstition, this is a misconception with real-world repercussions. It's been proven that black cats are much less likely to be adopted than pretty much any other colour of cat. Sometimes people just don't like the way they look, but often because of this idea that they'll bring bad luck with them. Not only are black cats less likely to be adopted, but in 2014 the RSPCA reported that 70% of the cats they take in are black. They think it's actually possible that one of the reasons for this is that people find black cats to be less photogenic than other kinds of cats, which just, I don't even know how to properly express the way that makes me feel. It's awful. Of course, there are plenty of reasons that an owner may have to rehome a pet because of no fault of their own, and I'm not judging those people. Actually, I think it's really important to address the stigma and judgment associated with people who have to give up their animals. But when people choose to take on a pet and then give them up for such a trivial reason, sometimes I really don't understand humans. It's so difficult to find good forever homes for black cats that here in the UK the charity Cats Protection declared the 27th of October to be Black Cat Day, a day dedicated to celebrating the beauty of black cats and encouraging people to adopt them. And as the proud owner of a black rescue cat myself, I fully stand behind that. But actually, the idea that black cats are unlucky is far from universal. In fact, in a lot of countries and cultures around the world, it's quite the opposite. Black cats are actually considered to be good luck. Even here in the UK, they used to be seen in that way, with a 17th century Welsh poem, translated into English because I would absolutely butcher the Welsh language, reading, "A black cat, I've heard it said, can charm all ill away, and keep the house wherein she dwells from fever's deadly sway." So, yeah, black cats haven't always had such a bad rap, and they definitely deserve more love. But I'm opening with all of this because today's story is about a black cat who turned out to be a very, very lucky feline indeed. When I'm writing the scripts for my episodes, I like to tell the story of the animal's life in more or less chronological order, starting with their early life and following them from there. But if you're regular around here, you'll probably have noticed that there are quite a few episodes that instead start with me saying that we don't actually know much about the early life of the animal in question, and guess what? That's the case here too. Actually, that's been an issue throughout my research. There's really not a lot of info out there about this story full stop. It's pretty much just all articles with more or less the same information, so unfortunately I can't tell you much about Tommaso's early life. What I can tell you is that he was once a stray, living a tough life on the streets of Rome, when he was found by Maria Jacinta, a woman who would have been around 90 years old at the time. I couldn't really find anywhere when Maria actually took Tommaso in, but I think it was when he was really young. Either way, based on both of their ages when she passed away, she would have had to have been at least 89 or 90 when she and Tommaso first met. And being an animal lover, Maria of course immediately welcomed this little stray cat into her home and adopted him, naming him Tommaso, a name which my phone insists on autocorrecting to tomato no matter how many times I type it, to the point where during my research I just gave up trying to correct it. Although for the record, I think tomato is a really cute name for a cat, just saying. Anyway, back to Tommaso and Maria. They were basically inseparable after this. Tommaso was Maria's entire world. She'd never had any children, her husband, a successful builder, had passed away, and by all accounts, she didn't have any other friends or family either. All she had was her little black cat. A black cat who was lucky for himself because he'd found a safe and loving home at last, but also for her because he offered her the love and companionship that she didn't have in her life until she found him. But like I said, Maria would have been at least 90 when she got him, while Tommaso was still very young, and naturally she began to think about what would happen to him after she passed, worrying about whether or not he'd end up in the kind of home and with the kind of owner he deserved. And this became especially important to her when her health began to gradually decline. From what I can tell, I don't think she had any specific illnesses or anything. I think it was just the kind of usual issues you'd expect for someone in their 90s. But then again, it's literally none of my business, and the specifics aren't important to the story either. What is important is that she realised she was going to have to do something for Tommaso. He was the only family she had, and so making sure that he would be provided for and loved was the most important thing to her. So much so that Maria felt the only way to ensure that Tommaso was properly provided for was to have it put into her will, and so in 2009, she went to her lawyers and told them she wanted to leave everything, her entire estate, to her cat. Except there's kind of an obvious issue with that. In Italy, and I would assume every country, a non-human animal can't legally own anything, which also means they can't inherit stuff from people. But it's not all that uncommon for people to want to leave things for their pets in their wills, and in fact it's not even unheard of for people to want to leave everything they have to their animals, as was the case here. And there is actually a way of doing that. It just takes a little more work since it's not as simple as leaving stuff to a human is. Now, I am absolutely clueless when it comes to this kind of stuff. I've never written a will for myself or been involved in anything like that, and I have no education in this kind of legal stuff either. So I'm going to do my best to explain it in layman's terms, but forgive me if I get any of the intricacies wrong. I'm an animal nerd, not a lawyer. Basically, how it works from my understanding is you can set up a trust with the animal listed as the beneficiary, and appoint a human trustee or trustees to manage the money on behalf of the animal, and I assume there are specific stipulations on how the money is to be spent to make sure that the system isn't being abused, like making sure the money is actually being spent on the animal and not on the trustee themselves. It was the lawyer's job to sort out a trustee. Maria's initial plan was for them to find an animal sanctuary or rescue organisation that would care for Tommaso. The goal seems to be that she would leave her entire estate to them in exchange for them caring for Tommaso, but for whatever reason they couldn't find one suitable. It seems that none of them lived up to Maria's standards, but as someone who's involved in an animal sanctuary, the Little Rescues if you want to check it out, I can't imagine any sanctuary turning down the amount of money Maria had. Like, no matter what stipulations she may have had for the level of care Tommaso needed, I just can't see any sanctuary not bending over backwards to give that to him for that kind of windfall. So I don't know if there was more to that maybe got lost in translation, or just never got reported on, but yeah, for whatever reason none of that worked out, and so Maria's lawyers instead decided to try and find an individual person who could be the trustee for Tommaso. And it just so happens that there was one person in Maria's life who seemed to fit the bill pretty nicely. At some point, Maria met a young woman named Stefania in a park, and the two seemed to get on well, with Stefania eventually becoming Maria's nurse when her health began to falter. Again, I don't have any idea of when the two met and Stefania began as Maria's nurse. I don't know if that was before or after they were looking for a trustee, but either way it seemed ideal. Maria knew that Stefania was trustworthy and genuinely cared about both her and Tommaso, so she seemed to be the obvious choice as a trustee, and when she was asked about it, Stefania was happy to take on Tommaso's care when Maria was gone. It seems that aside from Tommaso, Stefania was the closest person to Maria, but I'm not sure that they could necessarily be described as close friends. Stefania would later say that Maria was discreet, and that Stefania knew very little of her private life. Loneliness amongst older people is an epidemic, and hearing a story like this where it's such a key factor is just really sad. It's horrible to think about this woman with only her cat and a nurse for company, no real human friends. I know some people choose to live like that, but according to Stefania, Maria did say that she suffered a lot from loneliness. It seems like she'd have loved to have other people in her life, she just didn't. And then eventually, in November 2011, Maria passed away at the age of 94. Of course, everything had been arranged beforehand for Stefania to become Tommaso's trustee and manage Maria's estate, and perhaps she could tell that the elderly woman had been comfortably off, but she had no idea up until that point that Maria's estate totalled approximately 10 million euros. For my American listeners, the exchange rate at the time meant that it would have equalled over $13 million. And I mean, oh my god, can you imagine finding out that the lonely old woman you've worked for was secretly a multi-millionaire? And now you're the one in charge of that money? Wild. Freaking wild. Maria's estate, or Tommaso's estate I should probably say, mostly consisted of properties across Italy. Remember when I mentioned that Maria's husband had been a builder? Yeah, well he wasn't your standard odd-job white van man type of builder. I saw some sources describe him as a property entrepreneur. And when he passed away, all of that was left to Maria, who then, of course, left it to Tommaso, which made him the richest cat in the world. Which I don't imagine is that surprising to any of you, given that, most cats don't have a single euro to their name, much less 10 million of them. And yet, despite that, Tommaso's inheritance wasn't enough to make him the richest animal in the world. Yeah, there are animals out there that have been left even more money than Tommaso was. There are also people out there who can't afford to feed or clothe their kids, but I want this to be relatively light-hearted and animal-focused, so I'm not going to start ranting about financial inequality while hoarding and the inherent immorality of the ultra-rich. But I absolutely could. There isn't really all that much out there about Tommaso's life after his inheritance. As I said earlier, all I could really find about this case was a few articles from around the time it happened, focusing pretty much entirely on the cat becoming a multimillionaire and not on the actual cat as an individual. Stefania has chosen to remain very low-key about the whole situation, never even revealing her full name, and I absolutely get why. I mean, she had no idea that Maria had this kind of wealth, and given how well publicised this case became in the media, I can imagine that would attract any number of unsavoury characters trying to get their hands on the money through whatever means they can. So I don't really think anyone can blame her for wanting to be as private as possible. She did speak a little to the media after Maria's death, explaining how Maria had wanted someone who would give Tommaso cuddles and look after him properly, and again, how shocked she was when she found out just how much money Maria had, given that Maria had never really talked about her private life, with Stefania describing her as quiet and discreet. She did give one quote though, which I really love. Quote, "To be honest, he doesn't need all that money. He's happy with a saucer of milk and some biscuits." End quote. Tommaso doesn't care about being the world's richest cat, and I love him for that. The most recent update I could find on this case was that Stefania and Tommaso were living together somewhere in the countryside near Rome. They've kept information on the exact location under wraps to, again, protect from unwanted attention. They were apparently joined by a second cat too, although I couldn't find anything about them, their sex, age, anything about how they came to join them, if it was before or after Maria's passing. I'd assume after, since the estate was only left to Tommaso, but I guess they could have been a cat that was already owned by Stefania before she took on the responsibility for Tommaso, maybe? I don't know. What I do know is that if that was me, I'd be using that 10 million to start a luxury cat sanctuary and then rescue every abused, abandoned and neglected cat in all of Europe, but maybe that's just me. And speaking of that, I don't know enough about trusts and stuff to know what will happen to the money and property after Tommaso passes away. I mean, barring something genetic, he's probably still alive. He was 4 years old when Maria died in 2011, so that would make him, 17 or so now? Which is pretty old, but certainly not unheard of in cats, especially one for whom money is no object when it comes to vet care or high quality diet. But what will happen when he's gone? I highly doubt that he's managed to blow through 10 million euros worth of milk and cat biscuits in 13 years. Will it then all go to Stefania, or be donated to a sanctuary or rescue as per Maria's initial plan, or something else entirely? I have no idea, but if you can shed some light on the situation, then please do, I'm really curious. Of course, I absolutely understand Stefania wanting to protect her privacy, but I'd really love an update on how Tommaso is getting on. This is the kind of time when I wish my podcast was big enough and popular enough that I could say, if Stefania or anyone who knows her is listening to this, without it being a total shot in the dark, but alas, I am still very small fry in the podcasting world. Although if anyone who knows Tommaso is listening, our contact info is always in the show notes. Just saying. But yeah, that's the story of Tommaso, the stray kitten who ended up becoming the richest cat in the world. I'm just waiting for an animated film to be made about him. As a kid, I was obsessed with the Aristocats, which for those who don't know is an old Disney film about a rich lady with only her cat for company. Her butler finds out she's leaving everything to the cat in her will, and so kidnaps the cat and abandons it so he can inherit instead, and, typical Disney hijinks ensue and they all live happily ever after in the end. I'm pretty sure it was the first film my family ever got on DVD after we made the switch from videotapes. In fact, we ended up getting it before we even had a DVD player, so at first I had to watch it on the family PC, and yes, I am aging myself here. Anyway, point being, I watched this film all the time because I loved animals and I was too young to realise how racist it was. And I remember at some point my mum telling me that she was pretty sure it was loosely based on a true story. I suddenly remembered that while researching for this episode and decided to look it up, and it turns out that it's not true. It's complete fiction. But learning about Tommaso's story kind of rekindled that childlike joy in me, and at least now I have a similar true story to obsess over. Just one that's a lot less dramatic since Stephanie is very much not a Disney villain. But anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it's really short, but as I said, there just isn't much out there about the story. There's only so much I can pad out with my own thoughts and random tangents. I did consider including a second story in this episode. Like I said, Tommaso wasn't even the richest animal in the world. There were ones who inherited more than him. But honestly, sometimes I need shorter episodes. Currently, I'm an entirely one-person show. All of the research, the writing, recording, editing, that's all me, and it's a lot of work, especially as it's on top of, all my other life stuff that usually has to be prioritised. And it's not like I'm doing this podcast as a job or anything, it's just a passion project, and if it ever does make money, then I'm going to be donating all of the profits to the Little Rescue Zoo, which you'll definitely have heard about if you listen to any of my other episodes, so I'm not going to bore you by going over that again. The thing is, I really like being able to upload episodes weekly, and I want to keep going with that, but some episodes just take me longer than a week to make. And so ones like this that are a lot shorter and more straightforward are kind of the only way that I can stay on top of getting episodes out weekly, because having shorter ones means I then have extra time to get the longer ones done. So yeah, I hope you don't mind too much, but it was kind of this or reducing my schedule to uploading every other week, and I feel like a shorter episode is better than no episode, right? I mean, I'm still not 100% sure if long term I'm going to be able to keep up with weekly episodes. I might end up having to go for maybe 3 weeks out of 4 or something. It's just a lot of work, and because I have health issues, I'm not able to do as much as someone without those issues would. You wouldn't think that just sitting at home on a computer would be made more difficult by being unwell, but in my case it does. So yeah, I'm doing my best to do this podcast as well as juggling my health and other life commitments, but yeah, it can be difficult. But anyway, you aren't here to listen to me complain about my life. Is anyone even still listening to this? I feel like between this and the Aristocats tangent, everyone's left. I don't blame you. But if you are still listening, then as ever, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. All our social media and contact info will be in the show notes. Feel free to reach out and tell me what you thought of the episode. What would you do if someone left you 10 million euros? Let me know. I'd use it to build the world's biggest animal sanctuary, which will come as a surprise to none of you, I'm sure. And were any of you ever told that the Aristocats was based on a true story? Was my mum just lying to me, or was that a thing people thought? I need to know. Anyway, thank you again for listening. If you enjoyed, please do all the good things I'm supposed to ask you to do to support the show. Review it, share it, subscribe, whatever. You know the drill by now. New episodes of the Animal Nerd podcast come out every Tuesday, hopefully, unless my health gets worse, and I will see you next time. Stay wild, friends.